no time limit on the responses. We are going to make sure, however, that everyone gets the same amount of time to speak, and off we go. We're going to start with a question that's a little bit more personal. Now, in the election, you promised to be fair, and then you actually did attack each other quite personally. The Chancellor attacked you, he called you Fritze-Merz, and you said he was a lightweight, etc. So what about respect for one another? How much respect, Mr. Merz, do you have for the Chancellor?
Well, I took it in stride what the Chancellor said, and I guess that he's doing the same.
I would agree entirely. I think, obviously, there are going to be exchanges, there are going to be conflicts, there's some things we have to debate, but it'll be fun. Well, that's very interesting, because we wanted to know the way in which you're going to encounter one another. I mean, last week, Mr. Scholz, you said that you no longer trust Friedrich Merz. So, and then in the podcast, you said that Friedrich Merz was only planning conversations with the SPD and the Green Party pro forma, but would actually work with the AfD. And is this just sable rattling? Is this electioneering? Actually, that's really my concern. I don't want to pretend it isn't, because we heard last year from Mr. Merz, and you heard it from me, you heard it from other representatives of parties, that we're not going to work together with the AfD when it comes to points of order or motions or laws. And yet there has been a motion that the AfD was involved in. Of course, we have to ask what this motion is going to do. And was it just going to fail in the upper house of Parliament? That would have been a taboo break. So we can't be sure how things are going to be in the future. Things get difficult. I mean, our German government worked together very well, not working with the far right, the AfD. Now, you've said that not just for the first time. Now, Friedrich Merz, you have broken your word. You said you would not vote together with the far-right AfD. Now, why should we believe you that you're not going to do that next time? I mean, the trend in Germany suggests that 43% believe you will break your word again, and 44% of people think you will keep your word. So the citizens in this country find it very difficult to believe you.
Ms. Illner, amongst the 43 and 44%, there may be some who wish us to work together with the AfD, and I'm explicitly stating here that we're not going to do that. In political questions, there are worlds separating us with regard to Europe, NATO, Euro, Russia, America. There is no common denominator between CDU and AfD.
No coalition?
No. In no situation, and I've made it very clear, sufficiently clear, and you know it as well. Mr. Scholz, you know me, I know you. You know that something like that is out of the question, and it was not cooperation, what happened last week, as has been maintained by various sides, but there was an event that I would like to dwell on.
Let's separate the content from the questions between the two of you.
Yes, I'd just like to state very clearly, there will be no cooperation.
Now, is that something you believe, Mr. Scholz? I do not. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, in public and in... for a very long time, I've said I believe Mr. Merz, that he will act according to his declaration from last November. And the ex-Chancellor Merkel reminded us that that was very precise then. And Mr. Merz has said that he's excluding the cooperation that he said he wouldn't do again. But he's done it. It was a non-legislative motion for a resolution. He did it, for nothing. And he broke his word. He broke a taboo. I'm no longer certain. I hope he's right, but I'm no longer certain.
Let me show it to you, Chancellor, because last year, in the previous year, you said something in an interview with the Thuringian newspaper. If the votes of the AfD would be needed for a majority, that's not cooperation. That's what you said. And then you were asked, if a majority is generated through AfD, it doesn't matter. And your answer was, there seems seems to be something that is being turned into a problem on a local level, something that will never be a problem on regional or state level. Nobody should become dependent on the AfD voting. End of quote. I mean, you said it very clearly, and I'm saying it also very clearly. It is very clear. And if you don't believe it, Mr. Scholz, well, it's just saber-rattling in an election campaign.
I would like to contradict that in the strongest possible terms. However, I'm glad that you read out the entire quote, because I've often experienced it that you lead a bit of it out.
Well, I always read it
well, that's
in
good,
full
and
length.
I honour that. I think that's great. And obviously, it says it's very different from the state assemblies or the national parliament. And I was saying the AfD wants a nursery school in the on a municipal level. You can support them with that. That's not the same as working together with AfD. But what we experienced in the Bundestag was that Mr. Merz said exactly that he would never do this in November, and he did it. And this is why I have a loss of trust. Now, Mr. Merz, we were trying to get you to respond to whether you've noticed that there are demonstrations every other day, that there's outrage in the country, 250,000 people demonstrating in Munich yesterday. I mean, why did you not just wait 4 more weeks, or in fact it's only 2 more weeks to do this, because in 2 weeks we'll have the elections, and then on the first day after the elections you could do what you did and said you would do. Namely, you said on the very first day of being Chancellor you would have a decision that would ensure that laws could be changed. Why didn't you just wait?
So now, to form a government after this election is going to take a couple of weeks. And until you have a parliamentarian majority for such a government, it's going to be Easter or even later. And I've very clearly substantiated my opinion also with regard to the government declaration. I said at the time, and I'm repeating it here, that I cannot reconcile it with my conscience if after such a severe incident like the one that happened in Aschaffenburg, there was a 2-year-old child that was stabbed with a kitchen knife 7 times, stabbed by an asylum seeker who was obliged to leave Germany. Another family father who wanted to help was also killed. Another person was severely injured. I cannot accept that we hear a government declaration where he describes what has been done. The responsibility for the execution is being shoved to Bavaria, and they said nothing more could be done. And everything else that you propose, Mr. Merz, is against the Constitution. I didn't agree with that. And this is, and please let me complete this idea, this is why I have made this suggestion and proposal, a proposal with a legislative procedure which has been on the parliamentarian desk since September.
That was Friday.
And I asked for 4 hours for the approval of SPD and the Greens, and I never asked anybody from the AfD. Neither did I talk to anybody of the AfD.
So this wasn't successful on Friday. So here's my question again. How high was the price that you paid for the motion and the vote on Wednesday? Or how painful is it to you that somebody like Michael Friedman leaves the CDU?
What really pains me that we are witnessing demonstrations in this country against on the fight against the far right, but nobody thinks of the victims, of the families, and would take to the streets in support of them.
People do that. I was asking about Michael Friedman.
Yes, during the same time, there were hundreds of new members in our party, the CDU, for this cause, on this mine cause. We get a lot of consent and approval amongst the population. Our poll is rising, so it cannot have been entirely wrong. I would have wished it not to take place. I would have wished to have common decisions, but with this SPD and this Green Party, at this point in time, it hasn't been possible.
So, Mr. Scholz, let's look at you now. The SPD said that the gates to hell have been opened. Mr. Mützenich has called for Friedrich Merz to apologize to the public. But in the issue itself, it is the case that a majority in will it be enough in the next 2 weeks to just do what you've been doing, to warn that there's going to be a coalition, that it is opening the gates to hell, and you're distracting from the matter itself? Of course that's not going to be enough. We must talk about the issues at hand, and that's what we're doing here now. But I have to say this broke a taboo, and it was something that I find very worrying because it had not occurred in Germany until now. And of course, we are all worried as citizens of this country what's going to happen next. In the case itself, what we have to say is we can never reconcile ourselves with acts like this. And of course, we have to act conclusively and clearly. And so I think we have to be hard and resolute when it comes to irregular migration. I have to say that I asserted it by assuring that there are border controls in Germany. 40,000 people have been rejected at the border and sent away, and the number of people who came irregularly has dropped by nearly 100,000, so that's nearly a third. And in January, we've had the lowest value in terms of asylum seeking since 2016, and deportations have been increased by 70% since I became Chancellor, all for the reasons that Mr. Merz has said. And so this tough course with stepping up our laws, and I've agreed with the federal states, we've asserted this in the Bundestag in terms of detention and detention custody are things that I will continue. The law for implementing what we have agreed in Europe is also happening so that other countries can deal with us in a more fair way. And that we'll come back to that in a minute. Though, Mr. Scholz, I understand a regulated migration. Now, a question to you, Mr. Merz. The number of illegal immigrants has declined. So how is that not a success of Olaf Scholz?
The federal government didn't sit idle.
Generous.
It's not being generous. I regard this the way it is. I don't look at the exaggerations that are being portrayed. Mr. Scholz, within 4 days, we have as many immigrants as are being deported within 1 month. These remain being too many. We had 240,000 last year. In 3 years of your term in office, there were more than 2 million irregular migrants coming to Germany. Just to give you a feeling, an idea of what it means, it is more than the inhabitants of Hamburg. It is more than 4 times than the population of Nuremberg. It's more than the Free State of Thuringia has inhabitants. It's just too many. And yes, you enacted some laws, but some got stuck on the way because you didn't come in Parliament as far as you decided in Cabinet. And you're not asking and turning to the mediation committee because you're afraid that you don't find a majority with SPD and the Green if the big law gets improved. We're talking about IP addresses here, faster deportations and many other topics. You can't do in your coalition what needs to be done. And allow me a last comment. The topic of rejections at the borders is something that I suggested. You maintained it, and in Parliament you said it would be against the German Constitution and against European law.
And
what
that's
is now
going to be
right?
my next question to you, Mr. Scholz. Now, this accusation that Friedrich Merz's proposal is one that infringes against the law. It's not the first time you've said that. The SPD has said it as well in this debate. But on the other hand, that also means that there are people who are on German borders and they say the word asylum can come into Germany. And you believe that should continue because the laws are like that? First of all, let me say that these refoulements are perfectly acceptable because these are cases where there are no asylum applications. I made this possible by asking all of the heads of state and government around Germany, said, we want to do that, you've got to accept that because it is possible according to European law. What's not possible is when we're talking about cases of asylums, these have to be dealt with differently. We're going to have a huge improvement soon, but they're stuck in the Bundestag, and Mr. Merz is not allowing them through. That's the implementation of the Common European Asylum System. So you were talking about the CEAS. Well, it's a system that means that We negotiated away the problems that we had. It gives us more protection on Europe's external borders. There are many processes that we can do immediately. There are refugees that can be registered immediately. This is something we've called for in Germany and Europe for years. And the most important thing is we can send back even more people within the framework of European law. And these laws are ones that will come into force next year in Europe across the EU. And so we have to do that. So next year, yes, but I'd like to give you a forecast based on what we have done already. If you extrapolate from January, it wasn't just 100,000 less people last year, but this year it's going to be the same number again, if not more, because we have set the right course, and the laws that are in the Bundestag are ones that have to be approved. And like I said, Mr. Merz is stopping stricter laws, the police laws, all in the upper house of parliament, the Bundesrat, and he wants to create a show about motions. All right, let's ask Mr. Merz here. Let me interrupt you, but I'll just ask you one more thing, Mr. Scholz. Is it the case that you believe that through the CEAS, the Common European Asylum System, cases like these will be solved? Because just to remind you what that is, the Syrians and the Afghans are the largest groups of those who come to Germany, and whatever month they come to Germany, and they are not covered by the Common European Asylum System, which is particularly strict in the way it deals with people on the external borders, because they have an acknowledgement rate of 87%. I'll happily respond that. Well, you have to respond that. That's why you're here, Mr. Scholz. Yes, and that's why I want to say that those who have first come to another European country will be repatriated more easily. It's difficult now because each time we have to get the approval of the other EU state. In future, that will be different. And then we'll have far more cases that we can repatriate. And I think the point is that we have to have a very clear case that ensures that irregular migration declines. And let me say, in no uncertain terms, loud and clear, that there have never been tougher laws than the ones I asserted. And we're already seeing the impact. When the numbers went up in 2022, I dealt with it. In 23, I agreed with the federal states and with the other neighboring countries. So, okay, and now here's a question to Friedrich Merz. Mr. Merz, you have heard that you are offending our neighboring countries. Mr. Scholz says that you're causing trouble with all of our neighbors with this ban on entry, and then all of these legal directives, by the time they are harmonized, you're only going to really act nationally and ban everyone from entering the country. Is that right?
To be open, I didn't really understand what the Chancellor has said. So rejections seem to work, but then again, they don't. I want to make very clear it works. The constitution has been changed in Germany in 1993, and ever since, nobody who has reached the German border through a ground route has no right to ask for asylum, even if they do so. That's what the Constitution says. I informed you. You could have read it up. That's what our Constitution says. That has been changed in 1993, and a rejection following European law is something that is being done by France, Spain, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, with much more complicated external borders as compared to ours, and only with us in Germany it doesn't seem to work. The problem is that in this coalition between SPD and Greens, there is no consensus about how to deal with this issue. This is where the sticking point is. The Greens in European Parliament already voted against CEAS. The Greens make a lot of problems in the current coalition regarding the topic about the asylum seekers services law and the payment card. They wanted to introduce it. The Greens pay out cash onto the payment card that were meant to payment cards to replace cash money. Mr. Chancellor, you're painting a rosy picture. You're describing a situation which doesn't have much to do I'm not saying nothing, but which doesn't have much to do with the reality in this country.
I think that actually you're just trying to distract us from the reality, and you're saying something that is not true. The clear fact is we can carry out certain repatriations, and we do that. The ones that are legal, we do. What you're doing goes against European law, and the fact that nobody can apply for asylum in Germany is no good. Yes, but even if Mr. Tusk says that he's not going to stick to the CEAS, the Polish Prime Minister said he won't stick to this law. Yes, but what I want to say is, first of all, there's what I made happen. And then there is that he has suggested somebody says asylum, we send them back. The Austrian Chancellor said, we're not going to let them back. The Polish Prime Minister said, we're not going to let them back. And we've already got a European crisis right there. Germany is Europe's largest country at the heart of Europe. It's breaking the European law. That's what Mr. Merz is suggesting, where very soon we will be relying on all Europeans if we look at U.S. policy directed against Germany in terms of tariffs. We can only reject it together. It is against German interests, what Mr. Merz is suggesting. It goes against everything that will be in Germany's interest. Why should we be so stupid? And there's no other way of saying it. Why would we be so stupid? In the very moment in which Germany finally, under my leadership, after many, many years, has finally pushed for something we fought for so long, namely that the others who carry out the process for their asylum seekers have to take them back, that we suddenly say we're not going to stick to the law just before the end, and we're going to insist on exceptions that any administrative court or the European Constitutional Court would never put, then after 1 week, Merz will see that all of the statements that he's made are just not with the paper they're written on, because the courts will not support them.
Mr. Scholz, a witness of the time, was not a member of my party, and I read it on Spiegel Online. He gave a major contribution, a highly recognized historian of our country. He is a member of your party, Heinrich August Winkler, and I'm quoting him, although he also criticizes me in his article in Spiegel Online. But there's a very clear result in his article. Already before the amendment of the Constitution in 1993, it would have been admissible to reject asylum applications at our borders at latest on the basis of the changes that we have agreed upon in the Grand Coalition. It was possible. You can read it in Article 16a, paragraph 2, sentence 2 of the Constitution. Just read it up in your own time. You can read it there. It's very clearly laid down there. Now, the problem is you don't want to do it, because you can't assert this position in the rest of your coalition. Now, to refer to CEAS, this is going to come into force in the middle of 2026.
No, we
Should
don't.
we wait until then?
Of course we want to approve it this year, because there are plenty of things we want to do. I'm just saying, of course we want to reduce irregular migration by 100,000 euros because of the things we've asserted. In Austria and in Switzerland, these figures have dropped as well without these countries having changed anything about their border regimes. But one thing I'd like us to talk about is deportations. Now, Mr. Scholz, you have said that you have managed to deport many people. I think it was 4,000 in absolute figures, but you like to refer to the percentages. How much is that going to ease the burden on German cities if they hear 4,000 being deported? Well, sure, 4,000 isn't going to ease the burden on the municipalities, as particularly those who have to deal with major challenges across Germany, which is why I want us to take this further. I've said that we need to have more deportation centers and build them. When I was mayor of Hamburg, I did that, which is why I know what I'm talking about. Things like this can be done in Germany. They are possible. I ensured that there can be more people in detention custody. It's possible to have more, and all of the tricks that they use that were legal loopholes are now no longer there. And I have ensure that we can start with this now. Of course, we have to make sure it works in practice, which is why I say if you believe that this problem has been finished, no, it hasn't. There's more we need to do to get these numbers up. Mr. Merz, now you have argued that you want people to leave the country quickly. How are you planning to do it better than Olaf Scholz has? I mean, in a sense, you've got all of the police officers on the German borders.
Well, I've made concrete proposals as to how we could go about it. These proposals were very concrete. It happened last week when I made these proposals. And Mr. Scholz, you said you've done everything possible. Let me raise one point. It was the Greens in their coalition who asserted it. Those who are in deportation jail get a lawyer to defend them. A defense lawyer, just to look for any other loophole to maybe even forego another deportation after all the rest of the procedures have been finished after a valid judgment. They sit in jail, in detention center to await deportation, and you support them with another lawyer. You're not living in this reality. And what you're telling us is just a fairy tale which has nothing to do with what we see in our towns and cities in Germany. This is wishful thinking. I know it's election time, but it has nothing to do with the election or with the term of office over the last 3 years.
I think the Green Party would perhaps agree with that. I suppose they would say something very different. I think we won't talk about migration anymore. As important as it is, there's another important issue that is at the top of the polls when people are asked, what are you worried about? And that is Germany's investment location. It's the economy. There are many voices we could quote. We'll take the head of the DIHK, who just said that she has never seen such a bad mood, such bad figures. Mr. Melnikov said this. So in the analysis, is she right? Are we seeing a deindustrialization in Germany? Bad. The mood is bad. I would agree. Deindustrialization, she'd be wrong with that one. We're the country with the second highest density of industry among all strong G7 states, Italy, France, Britain, Canada, US, Japan. We are the country with the second highest GDP. We have a huge number of people in gainful employment, and we have brought the inflation down after it exploded after the stop of the gas supply from Russia to Europe and the price inflation that went hand in hand with that. We fought our way through it. So, of course, something has to be done now to ensure that on the basis of this growth, we dismantle the bureaucracy. That's important. And then I was saying a tax premium. Yeah, now we're talking about the things that need to be done, yeah? Yeah, I was saying we need to ensure that there's more public infrastructure. We have to talk about who's going to foot the bill. Sure, we'll do that. But first, I'd be interested in knowing is whether you are assessing the situation right. You're saying there's no deindustrialization. Mr. Merz, you have a different view.
Well, and again, I'm a little bit surprised, Mr. Chancellor, about your perception. We're now in the third year of a recession, which has never before been the case in Germany. We have 3 million unemployed people in Germany. Numbers are rising with 700,000 open jobs. There is a wave of bankruptcies like never before over the last 15 years. 50,000 companies went bankrupt during your term of office. More than half of them last year. And the numbers are growing again. And you're talking about that there is no deindustrialization in Germany. What else? How else could you describe the loss of 300,000 jobs in industry? This is deindustrialization. There is an outflow of capital in Germany. Like never before in the history of Germany, industry companies go abroad in large numbers. They are migrating elsewhere and bring their money. And this money is gone for good. It's going to never return. To stop this requires a lot of effort. I'm devastated when I see the perception of yours the way you describe the state of our economy, which has nothing to do with the reality on the ground out there. That has nothing to do with it, indeed.
Would you like to respond to that? Well, I certainly would like to respond to that if I'm allowed to. First of all, I would like to state what's happening, and I said that. And even if it wasn't in the plan, and so he responded to that, otherwise I wouldn't have said it, but I did say it. I said there's something happening and we have to do something. And we're going to talk about what needs to be done in this situation. However, it's also the case that we have 46 million in gainful employment and climbing. We have the second lowest level of unemployment of all the G7 states. So all of the big countries that I listed before, and that is a good basis for starting. And the Financial Times confirmed this in more detail and analyzed it and said that on the basis of what we have now, there's a good basis to grow the economy. And over 100 billion was invested in investment, and apart from the effects that Mr. Merz has talked about, of course we have a challenge if the global economy is struggling. But allow me to make one comment. Yeah, just one comment I'd like to make, and that is I didn't attack Ukraine. I didn't stop the gas supply from Russia. I didn't cause the economic situation that we're in. That was Putin. And so you can't refer to what he did and criticize us for that. I'd like to hear a rejoinder from Mr. Merz now. Olaf Scholz, he cannot be to blame.
It's not only Germany which is affected by the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. The whole of Europe is impacted by it, but other European countries are growing again, and we are on the last position of growth.
Well, I'll tell you
Europe.
why. I'll tell you why. We're doing better than others in terms of export orientation, so we know what's happening in the global market better than others. We had to fight harder with the energy prices that increased, coal, gas, oil. We have to import as Germans, and their prices exploded. So it was far more relevant for our industry. And I won't say, like with others, that was a different government, Mr. Altmaier as the economics minister and Ms. Merkel, who maybe didn't do everything to ensure that we're more independent. I was in the government then as well, but the point of departure is that. And I think it is not fair to pretend that this is something that we can just shake off. You know, maybe there's another issue that we'll talk about later on, and that is that the other countries made a lot of debt to cope with this. Now, let's have a look moving forward. Mr. Merz, the SPD is suggesting this Made in Germany bonus in order to get some impetus in this country. Every investment in machines and equipment will have tax incentives. Is that a good approach?
Allow me another remark regarding our dependency on exports. That's
and it's
just
good that we have so much exports.
We were very strong.
You can't suggest it's a bad thing just because it's not going well.
And the energy policy was also very clearly geared unilaterally to Russian gas. But, Mr. Chancellor, why in the midst of a largest energy crisis of our crisis, you're switching down 3 nuclear power plants that were operating properly, which could have provided affordable power to our industry?
Just a question. Wouldn't we have this terrible crisis if they hadn't phased out these 2?
Let me give you an example. There is a steelwork in Lingen, Georg Marienhütte. They produce steel on the basis of electricity. There was a nuclear power plant adjacent to the steelwork, and they relied on this power plant. You probably know Ms. Grossman, who declared that they are going to interrupt production because they can't get affordable energy for their production of steel. These are decisions that are based on ideology. You decided something as a chancellor that could have been decided differently, and the Greens have exerted pressure, and you try to cut through this Gordic knot, and you close down these nuclear power plants. This is madness.
Mr. Scholz, are you someone, if you've ordered leadership, were you not strong enough against Mr. Habeck? Well, no, I asserted what I wanted to assert. But Mr. Merz is saying that he would have done it differently with the nuclear power plants, but he knows that it has nothing to do with Germany's GDP. It's 0.0002%. I mean, Mr. Merz, you just said it yourself as well. I just wanted to make it clear our citizens are aware of this. This has nothing to do with the economic developments. And now on to the power plants. Yes, twice in Germany we have phased out nuclear power. Around 2000, that was FDP and CDU, and also CDU, SPD, basically all of these parties have phased out nuclear power. I extended the decommissioning until the very last moment that was possible in terms of the fuel rods, and I'm happy to admit that I believe that in view of the fact that we now finally, by dismantling all of obstacles, we are marching forward with renewables so that the future generation of wind power, etc., is going very well. It was okay. They cost 40 billion euros to keep these nuclear power plants going. So that's just nonsense. Now, just some questions that I'd like to ask. I'm going to repeat them to Mr. Merz so you can tell us what you think about the Made in Germany bonus. This is a key element of the future-oriented policy, 10% tax incentive. Isn't that a good approach?
Well, it is a path that the Social Democrats have been embarking upon every time when things get difficult. Higher debt, higher government expenditure, and now this animal is given a new name. I mean, we need to change the framework conditions for everybody, independently of whether you get a bonus on your investment or not.
Isn't that a tax reduction?
It's going to be a flash in the pan, which is going to cost a lot of money, and they can't sustain that over various years. What we need are reliable, permanent framework conditions for investment in Germany, and not these one-off effects that you are not able to pay for, and the result of which are not effective. They can even cause the contrary, because that invites investments
Can you
that are
perhaps tell us
probably not
the
conducive.
simpler concept, tax reductions for all? That's very simple, less bureaucracy. Is that what you would do? Well, I'm absolutely against that. We haven't got the money for it. In this budget, we've got 25 billion that are still not covered, and there's going to be even more that we're going to have to spend on the German armed forces. That's 30 billion in a year or two. So this is completely missing the point. This goes against the overwhelming majority of our citizens. It's against 95%. If the core suggestion to get the government going is that those who earn the most should get 20 billion euros tax reduction by getting rid of the solidarity surcharge. And this is true for the companies as well. If a company, according to the suggestion of Mr. Merz, has a few 100 million euros profit, pay slightly less tax, and then they invest it abroad, we have won nothing. And this is why the Made in Germany bonus is not a flash in the pan. It's something we want to introduce permanently as a tax incentive. Companies will be able to count on it if they invest in Germany. And when they aren't a major corporation with huge profits, but rather an SME company and don't make much profit, or a startup. Now, in response to the tax issues, you can respond in a minute, but I think we'll come back to that. Yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. Now, we also wanted to say, what's going to happen if we have a Bundestag without the FDP?
Well, it would be poorer, but viable.
Mr. Scholz, I agree entirely with him. That's perfect. Poor but viable. Now, Deutsche Bahn, what's going to happen to it? Well, it's going to be further renovated. We've got billions that we've freed up for that. The core routes are going to be improved. And every 10, that's going to be 10 years long. We're going to renovate all of it. And Transport Minister Wissing has done it well. So that's a long sentence. Too long, that sentence. Mr. Merz. Same question to you.
We want to separate the grid and operations. The grid needs to stay in government hands, and operation is something where competition can take place. That's a good concept.
I'm against privatization of Deutsche Bahn.
Well, that's not the plan. It's about the grid, the network on the one hand, and operations.
Yes, against the will of everyone in the rail sector. You just want to take it all apart. It'll be like the UK, where none of the trains run on time, and you only have bad trains and bad rails. Now, if everybody would like it if the trains were punctual. Now, people think wind turbines are ugly. Mr. Merz, it's not just Alice Weigel who says that, but you think that too.
Well, they are not beautiful, sure, and when they stand somewhere in the landscape, at home, the area that I come from, in the valleys of the Sauerland, they are not beauties. I've got a different aesthetic perception as compared to some others here, but they are necessary, and I'm committed for them to be built and accepted by the population. And they will only be accepted if we don't see wind turbines wherever we look.
Olaf Scholz, wind turbines and you. Well, wind, solar, and the expansion of our power grid are important. We have to accelerate all of this. We will need more power in the future in Germany. In order to be successful, we need to have 800 terawatts by 2030 instead of 600, so it's a massive increase. And 80% of that has to come from renewable sources, from wind, solar, biomass, and a power grid that can bring the power from one end of the country to the other. It's generated in one place and it's needed in another, so that we have what we need in Germany, a strong, cheap power grid. I'm not trying to torment you. I'm just trying to cover more points that can be done quickly. So Trump's plan to turn the Gaza Strip into the Riviera of the Middle East, what do you say about that? It's a scandal. It's a terrible term, because we are seeing that the ceasefire has started. We're able to see the level of destruction that's there, with the Egyptian government, the Jordanian government, and the people who need to require dignity. I mean, this goes against international law. It's shocking.
I share this view, but it's part of a series of proposals that come from the American administration, which are irritating, but we have to wait and see what is really being meant seriously. And maybe there's
staying with Trump now,
not so much
the Trump
substance.
Government, there are only two genders. What do you say with that?
It's a decision that I understand.
I think that's shocking. Everyone should be happy the way they want to be happy. And if people don't have a clear gender and need to figure it out themselves, then that's their business. It's nobody else's business. I don't want to stop people from being helpful. Now, we really need a chainsaw to stop the bureaucracy. I agree.
It's a metaphor I wouldn't share, but I would talk about reducing bureaucracy, which has to be done in a proper and orderly manner. The way it is in Europe is not the way to go on.
Now, for the companies, a statutory minimum wage of 15 euros would be what, Mr. Merz?
If the minimum wage committee decides this, it's okay. If the Chancellor has a vote on that and has it decided upon, it would be wrong. It's a broken promise from 2021. The Chancellor then promised that the minimum wage of 12 euros would be a one-off decision supported by the government in 2021, and now he's going to the second round of minimum wage up to 15. Was this a breach of your promise of what you suggested in 2021?
Mr. Scholz? No, it isn't. First of all, let me say I'm in favor of 15 euros statutory minimum wage. I commit to that. And the companies are supposed to enjoy that. They're supposed to like that. Can they manage it? For the productivity of our economy, this is right. And you can do the math. If you've got a 40-hour week and you only get 15 euros an hour, it's hard enough to pay your bills when you have a family and children. And these are hard-working people. I am proud that the SPD has asserted the statutory minimum wage for 6 million people. That meant an increase in their wages, particularly in Eastern Germany. I'm proud that we managed to get it up to 12 euros. That meant that nearly 7 million euros had an increase. So many people earn so little, and these measures have ensured that the low-wage sector in Germany is as low as it's ever been. It's really shrunk through my government. So that's why I think it was a big mistake that the Statutory Wage Commission agreed with a majority, and there was no consensus that they sought with the trade unions and the employers. I hope they have learned from their mistakes and have the idea that they should raise it to 15
May I ask a
euros.
question? Mr. Chancellor, we're hearing from the Minimum Wage Committee that they agreed on a new procedure. If the committee meets again and they make their own proposal, will you accept it?
Well, if they agree on the basis of consensus, it will be acceptable for me.
That means you take down the billboards where you're asking for 15 euros?
15 euros. It would already have to be above 14 euros. And I would like to say that this is the difference. We don't have to agree on that. I believe that people who don't earn much money should earn more money. And this brings us to the question of how are the people in this country doing? We've talked about how the economy is doing. We've talked about the budget. And we'll talk about the budget and taxes in more detail, but maybe it's worth looking a bit more at the situation in this country. Olaf Schmitz, there's, petrol filling stations, housing, so many other things. The coalition have not managed to ease people's fears about the future. There's a 27% increase for the cost of living in the last few years. With inflation and with all of the other things that I've referred to, people have 20% less disposable income. So has the coalition made people poorer? No, it hasn't. But the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine and the energy inflation, and before that we had the COVID pandemic, and the price hikes that you've referred to have all taken place. We've tried to help them with tax incentives across the entire range, particularly with low earners. We've reduced the social contributions, but none of this is it's not helping. People are afraid. We have also tried to support the policy of the European central banks to combat inflation, because we're all suffering from inflation. It's been hard, but inflation is the thing we must combat at all costs. And the countries that are comparable to us, the strong economies, the democracies, we are one of the ones who is doing particularly well. If you look at Japan, the US, the UK, inflation is higher than it is here in Germany. So I think we have to continue on the path that we are on. But for those people who do not earn much money and have to cope with these prices, we must ease the burden on them. So tax burdens must be eased on the lower earners, not those who earn a lot of money. And this is why I think we should drop the VAT on food. Drop the VAT on food. Okay. Then, Mr. Merz, there's a question to you. If I've understood you correctly, you only want to reduce VAT on schnitzels in restaurants, or maybe beer as well. Now, in view of the things that we are talking about here, is that a good measure in order to help people who just don't have very much money?
Well, we want to reduce the hospitality tax so that food would have a uniform tax level of 7% and not 7 or 19. But that's not the topic that we're talking about. We're asking whether people have gone poorer.
That's what I told you.
Yes, that's what happened. We have now 400,000 more unemployed people. These are 400,000 individual destinies, 400,000 families we're talking about, where a breadwinner has become unemployed.
Yeah, but it would be a bit too simple, wouldn't it, Mr. Merz? So a question for you. In the future, these increases are going to continue. Not just the price hikes and inflation is going up, but now we're going to have the CO2 price that people have to pay. The social contribution for nursing care, for health insurance have increased significantly. So what's the proposal of the CDU? Because things will continue.
Well, let's take a look at the various levels that are included in your questions, various topics. Now, you refer to the carbon dioxide price. It's a shared decision of the former government and the European Council, European Parliament, European Commission. There will be a European system where the German system is going to expire in parallel to it. There will be a compensation for all households in the sense of a so-called climate money, which has been agreed upon in 2022 and which was meant to have been paid out. There is a climate transformation fund where you find the money, but you don't pay out this money. Initially, it was meant to be 200 euros per month paid out to those who have to pay this carbon dioxide price. And that would allow for this social compensation. And for families with lower incomes, there will be a higher compensation because they don't pay that high power prices. So there's a social component integrated into this system. Nobody needs to be concerned that this would be unjust and unequitable. It's the right way to reach climate neutrality. That was our shared proposal. It is a proposal which I believe is still the right one.
We're going to stay with Mr. Merz just for one moment, if you could bear with us, Mr. Schulz, because he's had 3 minutes less speaking time than you. Otherwise, we would have just talked it through ourselves. But just to let you know, so with reference to carbon price, you've said it's 3 cents a litre in the filling stations, and it plays a role with heating as well for people. Now, what about nursing care? In the last while, we have seen that since we've gone from 2,600 to 3,000 that people have to pay themselves for people requiring a lot of nursing care. Now, of course, this is a big issue. It's a complex issue. But what's the substantial solution? All of the statutory health insurances are struggling at the moment, and they are wanting to either increase their contributions or reduce the services they offer. What's the position of CDU?
Currently, we have 15% of those requiring caring live in caring institutions. 85% are being taken care of at home, and we should recognize the care given to family members, also to children, and this is a task that we also look at by increasing the nursing allowance, and in doing so we help people to take care of their family members at home.
But I mean, somebody who's getting nursing care as the elderly can't pay their own contribution.
Yes, right. That's why we have this nursing insurance. It is a partial, not a full insurance. There's an intense discussion whether it should be turned into a full insurance. I'm skeptical about this proposal. It would be better if in the longer run we ask people to conclude a additional nursing insurance on private terms. We need to make sure that the factor labor would still be worthwhile in Germany in relation to the social contributions that have to be paid. So we always have to even out what has to be done for the welfare state in Germany. We have to do that, but we also need to think of our competitiveness, of the competitiveness of our industry and competitive jobs. And allow me a last remark. Something that got lost in the discussion earlier on. We have a high employment rate currently, that is right. But this high employment level is based on part-time work, and it also is a result of a change from industrial jobs to service jobs, and the available income gets lower. And that's not what I understand by a competitive industry. We need to secure Germany as a location for the industry. And once we've done that, paying for our social security system will be easier for us.
Now, the SPD has a different position than you in certain cases. Mr. Schulz, perhaps you you will forgive me if I ask you to be a little bit brief. We'd be interested in knowing your position on the basic security benefits. Well, I do want to say something about that. I mean, we don't have to say anything about the laws. You know, I'm in favor of the basic social security benefits.
That was part of your coalition agreement.
And we're in favor of carbon pricing. I'm not going to go into that. It took a lot of technology to ensure that the data from banks and tax numbers can be connected. It was difficult to do, but we've done it, and now it works. And then we reduced the electricity tax, and the renewable energies levy was also changed so that we have reduced the surcharges as much as we can, and that eases the burden on power prices. And of course, it's about reducing taxes when we're talking about that. When it comes to nursing care, I'm in favor of there being a €1,000 cap on the contributions, and there should be more solidarity between the private and the statutory health insurance companies. You want to bring them together? No, I'm saying they should be dovetailed more. So if I earn €5,000 and I'm single, I pay for the single mother with 3 children who only earns €2,000, because the health insurance contribution isn't going to be enough to cover everything. And if the private and statutory health insurance companies are dovetailed, even though they're separate, we will have done something, and it will become cheaper for all of us.
I haven't understood it, but I'm going to study it, probably in due time.
Well, you should try and understand it, actually. Well, if you're talking about €1,000 as a cap, that is important, because there was a long dispute about that. We're referring to the Bürgergeld, the basic social security benefits. What's your position on that? And we're talking about the money, Matt. How much money do you think you will save through the basic social security benefits? Because that's what we're thinking about. We're going to ask about the taxes and the budget.
Well, there was a mediation procedure with the committee where we agreed to a mediation result. And Mr. Scholz is going to talk about that. I'm saying that.
How many billions do you want to save?
Let me give you the number. We have 100,000 recipients of basic social security benefit that are going to return to the labour market. We're going to save €5.1 billion. We have got 1.5 million recipients who could work out of 5.6 million in total. If only a quarter of them can be returned to the labour market, that equals 400,000. Who we need in our labour market? 700,000 open postings in the labour market and 400,000 recipients of basic social security benefit working. These are billions of euros that can be easily saved. We want to have a basic social security assurance for those who need it.
So was this basic social security benefit a mistake? Yes. I mean, was the title a problem? We called it citizens' benefits. You know, we heard sanctions referred to by Hubertus Heil. I mean, it's supposed to be targeted. Have you signaled this? You know, I recently went to an election talk, and somebody played me something I said as a young politician in 1995. And with reference to the income support, I said at the time, I think you should work if you can work. And so I have to say, I think there should be very clear sanctions for income support. We have to develop them. The law is ready to be approved. It's in the parliament, particularly at the elections. It's more targeted. Okay, I think we're going to stop there. We're going to stop there.
May I ask a question?
No, if you want to talk with one another, go ahead.
I would like to ask the following question. You were the Secretary General of the SPD when Gerhard Schröder made the Hartz IV law that you defended vehemently. Should we get back to this path?
Well,
can we agree on this?
The Bürgergeld, the basic social security benefits, is going to require tough sanctions. Listen, I'm a politician in Germany that is in favor of tough sanctions for income support, because I think if you can work, you should work.
I never noticed it, but probably I've overlooked something. You never know.
Then we have a question about taxes. Now, Mr. Merz, you criticized the SPD plan to ease the tax burden on 95%. What's wrong with it?
Well, I'm grateful that we get back to this topic because, Mr. Scholz, income tax is not only paid by the rich ones, but is also being paid by individual business people, retailers, companies. It is being paid by hundreds of thousands of companies who pay income taxes instead of corporation tax. And if you increase their income tax burden, I can only say the wave of insolvencies in Germany is going to get even higher. We cannot push these companies out of Germany. Many of them are going to leave the country.
Hang on, I'm going to criticize this because we don't have the numbers yet. We haven't got the numbers yet. We don't know how this is going to impact on the top marginal tax. You're going to saying 95% of people will have an easier, the tax burden will be eased on them. Well, I can answer that. First of all, I'd like to say that people like you and me, we're going to pay more taxes, and so we should. And people who earn even more than you and me should also pay more taxes. I think that's just. And I think that the ideology that Mr. Metz has said that if somebody earns 3.5 billion, or million rather, if they have to pay more taxes, they have to leave the country.
I'm talking about the small and medium-sized enterprises.
No, you're talking about people who earn $1 million and you want to ease the tax burden on them for 250,000 euros. They can go and buy themselves yet another sports car. I don't see why that's just and fair. How high should the top tax rate be? I think that the wealth tax, the top tax rate, should increase by 2%, but should be only come into play much, much higher. So that means that a family that has a very high income earning above 100,000 should not have a higher tax burden.
Mr. Scholz, if that will come about, easing of the tax burden for 95% of income earners, then you need to have a top rate of 60%.
Well, I'm not going to do that if that calms you down.
I crunched the numbers, and I can only say have a safe travel, because that will mean that you are going to destroy the medium-sized enterprises in Germany. These are the tax brackets of the small and medium-sized enterprises. They are the ones who create the largest number of jobs and training places. It's SMEs. Family-run companies, owner-run companies. If you don't look at these companies, you're making a grave strategical mistake.
You know, if you finished your little speech bubble, I talked about 2%. I didn't say up to 60%, just so we got the math right. 60%, Mr. Metz? That's just a proposal.
Well, I haven't said that this is your proposal, but if you want to reduce the tax the way you propose it and you promised it, then you need to compensate for the
losses. No, I've had lots of other proposals,
losses.
and we factored in the number. We did the numbers very cautiously and carefully. But your concept is essentially to reduce the tax burden on people who earn an awful lot of money. You call them SMEs. But there are many SME people who do not earn the kind of money that you're talking about there. I'm just saying if you earn 3 million, you can pay a bit more taxes. And you don't think that's true. And that's the difference between us. But the question at the end of the day is you both want to ease the tax burden on different people to different amounts. How can it be financed? A question to you, Mr. Metz. There is a new calculation about how you might cover the gap in your budget if we put together all of your tax savings. We're talking about 111 billion if you ease the tax burdens you want to. Can we do that without reforming the debt ceiling? Somehow or another?
That the DIW disseminates such a figure is not a surprise.
Well, there's another number that says 80 or 90 billion, but the point is serious gap in your budget.
The tax reform will come in 4 steps. And the basic condition for that is that we get our business, our economy growing again. Currently, we're shrinking. In a shrinking economy, we have a tax rate of 30% for corporations. And I want to have a corporate tax rate of 25%. And a growing company, 25% is better income as compared to 30% in a shrinking economy.
And how are you going to manage this without new debt?
Well, let me start talking about the current debt situation. We're going to have a follow-up budget in 2024, and we also have to conclude the budget for 2025. With the current debt ceiling, we could incur another 50 billion euros for 2024, and 50 more billion for the budget of 2025. Within 2 years, it's 100 billion euros of additional debt. That's the equivalent of the state budget of North Rhine-Westphalia on top of our current debt mountain. How far do we want to go? I believe that we have an obligation with regards to our children, because they are the ones who have to pay back these debts at some point in time in the future. We know it's not easy, but fundamentally speaking, we should make do with the tax income that we have in Germany. These are 1,000 billion euros per
Mr.
year.
Scholz, has he done his numbers right? Well, the budget for 2024 is already over, and if we're talking about additional debt that we can enter into on top of the budget, there are very different views on this. I don't think his numbers are correct, but that's not the issue. Let me tell you quite clearly, this year there are 25 billion euros that are missing. They are not covered in the budget, which is why we concluded our coalition, because I said that everything that we're spending extra on Ukraine, that's 12 to 15 billion euros, also for the refugees here, should not be at the expense of everyone else. I said 2028, in the next position, we are going to have 30 billion euros that we have to spend on the German armed forces, and we're not going to manage that without reforming the debt brake regulation. And we can afford that. 120% of GDP is what the U.S. has in terms of their debt. We're around 60%. All of the other strong economies like Italy, France, Canada, Japan, etc., have over 100% sovereign debt. And we don't. We shouldn't have to neglect our roads, our rail, and the people who need money in this country. No, I'm somebody who asserted the debt brake, and I want it to be enshrined in the German constitution. I still want to reform it. So it's clear that you have different positions here. So we're going to ask some short questions now. The housing index, should it continue? Well, it's going to run out. We have to look at how to affect it.
Well, I think it slows down the construction of new residential buildings rather than supporting it.
Are you both going to stay on X, Elon Musk's platform?
For the time being, but I don't feel good there. Increasingly not.
Yes, I also do interviews for newspapers who reject me completely. Should gender be banned?
Yes, it should be banned.
Only be 2 genders?
The second part of the answer is right. Authorities have to follow the Council of
You know what I think is really great
recommendations.
is when people meet and one says, they talk to people as, men and women, ladies and gentlemen, and they say workers, male and female workers, and then the head of a craft trades organization comes along and says, I'm a mason. So say mason, masoness, whatever you like.
Yes, I agree, but authorities are authorities.
Moving right along now to foreign policy and looking at the situation in Ukraine. Mr. Scholz, Mr. Merz, are we going to achieve peace faster in Ukraine because Donald Trump is in power? It remains to be seen, but it would be very good if this war were to end. Hundreds of thousands of people have died through the destruction that Ukraine has unleashed, that Russia has unleashed in Ukraine, all of the missiles and all of the damage. And of course, many, many Ukrainian soldiers have died. Hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers have died for the imperialist dream of Russia, or are injured and will never get health again. Staying with the same question, will there be a faster peace in Ukraine, and are we prepared for that if Donald Trump takes over?
Well, 3 years ago, when this war started, I wouldn't have believed that it would last for 3 years. It was possible, I believe, to end this war earlier if we only had helped Ukraine with more determination, but that's water down the bridge. Let's wait and see what the proposals will be during the Munich Security Conference next week. Without America, it won't work, but there must be no decision taken over their heads and without the contribution of Ukrainians. And it would be good to develop a shared strategy between Europe and America.
How can we best protect Ukraine from a further attack from Russia? Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's very important that the U.S. does what we are doing, namely signalize to Russia that we are going to continue to support Ukraine. Otherwise, Putin will never agree to anything. Everything else is an illusion. I'm very much hoping from conversations that I've had with Trump that this could succeed. I'll say so quite clearly. Secondly, Germany is the strongest supporter of Ukraine in Europe and must continue to be so. However, unlike you, I didn't go back and forth with the cruise missiles, for example, a bit of a threat to Putin back and forth like this. No, I think it remains a very dangerous war in which we have to ensure every day that it doesn't escalate into a war between Russia and NATO. And as to what we must do, well, I think we have to help Ukraine to have a strong army, because with their national economy, they will not have the army that they need to defend themselves. They won't be able to finance it. That's the most important thing. We need security guarantees that we have agreed and with our allies. So should they join NATO? The American government rejects that idea. NATO's resolutions are such that the option is there, but it's not happening anytime soon. So NATO membership at this point isn't so much the issue. We need to guarantee that Ukraine cannot be attacked again. And this is something that we need to do together by thinking through our policy in a reflected manner, not over the heads of the Ukrainians. We must not discuss this piece. I don't like it if some say, oh, well, you could give them that territory. That's up to them. And these questions now to Friedrich Merz. How can we protect Ukraine from another attack by Russia?
Well, we're going to see as soon as a peace plan has been put onto the negotiation table, and Ukraine needs to take their part in this. It cannot be done without Ukrainians, but I'm under no illusion for the next years we will have to expect Russia to continue being aggressive against Western countries, against European countries. They will take an aggressive military stance. I share the Chancellor and his defense minister's point. It's a position I'm sharing. And by the way, when it comes to Ukraine and Taurus cruise, I was very clear. There has never been a change of my opinion. I always made this opinion very clear.
No, that's not true, Mr. Merz. I have to disagree with you. You said within 24 hours we have to respond, and then you said that training Ukrainians will take 4 to 5 months, and then you said that this is something that has to be agreed on in Europe.
Yeah, there was never deviating opinion on this point. I've always been saying any kind of cruise missile supply needs to be agreed in Europe. America are supplying UK as well.
I'm sorry, I have to.
It's only the question
whether Ukraine join NATO.
The question is whether we equip Ukraine to make a stance against Russia.
With reference to missiles that actually attack Russia, far into Russia, this is the step where Germany wouldn't support it. Should Ukraine join NATO?
They can't do that because NATO doesn't accept members who are currently in a war. Ukraine has been given the candidate status for the membership in the European Union, which is the right thing to do. Work is underway. In the medium run, Ukraine should become member of the European Union, and within the European Union, after the EU treaty, there are support obligations, just like in NATO. Ukraine would have a significant amount of more security through their membership in the European Union, and this war needs to come to an end as soon as possible.
So next weekend, the Munich Security Council, you've just referred to it, the president won't be there, but he's sending his people. Donald Trump has been in office for 3 weeks now. WHO, he's pulled out of that. And he's putting the climate agreement on ice. U.S. aid is stopping. He talks about the Gaza Riviera. We talked about that. And when he looks to Greenland and doesn't exclude violence, Mr. Merz, you once said he is predictable. Do you think he's predictable as a partner or an opponent?
Well, he is predictably unpredictable. What he is saying currently are not really new, because he has been raising these points before as well. On this side of the Atlantic, there are a lot of concerns about what is coming up still, and therefore it's important for us on this side of the Atlantic to be united. And this includes the Brits, although they are unfortunately not members of the European Union anymore. I talked to the Danish Minister President only recently, a lengthy talk, and we're going to meet again in Munich next week. She's very much concerned about the Greenland topic. We need a joint, shared European strategy, a shared position, and I hope that we find this position. I'm going to spend a lot of time and effort, should I be elected to become Chancellor, to provide for this European cohesion. Europe, 450 billion inhabitants, are much larger than America and Canada together, which shouldn't make us smaller than we are.
has accused you of saying that Trump doesn't take you seriously, and then the lightweight came out, that he sees you as a lightweight. So what would be your strategy for dealing with Trump? The strategy I've already used, clear words and friendly conversations. I mean, I have already spoken to the U.S. president, as have my advisors with him. That's part of what we have to do. We want to work with the government. That's a clear principle. Without the U.S., we would never have achieved democracy after the fascism. So it's important that we have a transatlantic relationship, but we mustn't kid ourselves. What the U.S. president says, he means, and there are some people who say his bark is worse than his bite, but I think that's why it was important that I was the first EU head after the discussion about Greenland to say you can't do that. And what are the consequences? I said you cannot push borders with violence, and that's definitely true for our partners, not just for Putin. Well, if you have one NATO land looking at another NATO land, I mean, what could you do to stop it as the German Chancellor? We could close ranks in the EU, make a clear statement, and make it clear that this is something that we absolutely have to stop. We have to be very precise. We're working on a proposal together with other countries within NATO to say that we're going to increase the presence of NATO in Greenland, because then the one argument that there are not enough soldiers there can be eliminated. We can counter it, and it's correct as well that through the melting ice, it's also the case that this region is going to create and have a new significance. So this is a specific step that we have to take. We just have to say no. So you both say we have to do it together. This isn't a geopolitical question, but it is an important question. Donald Trump has specifically come up with tariffs against Germany and the EU. Do we have to respond tit for tat, Mr. Merz?
I've been saying for many months now, even way before the election of Trump to become president, that we have to be prepared for President Trump. And tariffs are an instrument that we can talk about. Let me give you an example from 2018, when he was already president. Jean-Claude Juncker was the Commission president. We had tariffs against German steel and aluminum. The European Union introduced tariffs on American whiskey, jeans, and motorcycles, Harley-Davidsons. Jean-Claude Juncker traveled to Washington, talked to Trump, and said, you know, listen, there are two options. We either continue or we, both of us, get the tariffs down to zero. There was a strong European answer on eye level with the Americans, and a couple of weeks later, the tariffs were off the table.
And is there already a list like that, Mr. Scholz? I mean, you're the Chancellor who has to deal with the tariffs together with the European partners. Is there a list of the tariffs that Washington is passing on? We are well prepared. The short answer is yes, we're prepared. obviously with all diplomatic caution, but we're ready to act within 1 hour as the European Union. It's important to say that our trade policy is an EU competence, and it's one of the reasons why we should insist that we stick to this common rules with the EU. If the US have tariff policy, then there's going to be one export nation that is very much going to suffer from that, and that is Germany. This is why we have to ensure that there is solidarity with tariff policy, but all other types of policy, just to touch very gently on an issue we referred to in the beginning. We get it, we hear you. But defense policy, you talked about already, is an expensive matter. We haven't probably got enough time as Germany to ensure that where necessary, we have the defense capabilities that NATO or the US can't compensate from. How much should we pay for defense in terms of our GDP? At least 2% for the next 4 years, Mr. Scholz? At least 2% for the next 4 years, yes. And apart from that, in NATO, we're currently talking about capability targets. And then we're going to have to look long and hard at what that's going to mean for us as Germany, as will the other countries. And we're going to have to take the consequences as well. For me, what that means is that the 30 billion from 2028 we're going to have. We'll only be able to do that if we reform the debt brake enshrined in the Constitution. That's the only way we can get that money unless we want to cut the budget elsewhere. And if we decide in Europe we need to do far more, we have to ask who's going to foot the bill. If it isn't ordinary taxpayers in Germany, then we won't be able to do it without tax increases. All other countries around us have already done that. Whenever they've made decisions of this kind, we're not going to be able to increase it beyond 2% and just pay it by the by. So, Mr. Merz, your figure in your Bavarian agenda, you talked about 3%. Where's your number?
Well, there is a NATO agreement on 2% minimum. We still need to get there, and it won't be enough in the medium perspective. But we shouldn't talk about money only.
But surely you will allow me to say the 3% of the CSU. Do you agree with that?
I share the view that we need to be way above 2%, but we need to get to that target. We need to get to 2% step by step, and then we're going to travel towards 3%.
And the second question is, where's the money going to come from?
Well, according to the current state of affairs, there will be a gap of 30 to 40 billion euros for the budget.
It's more 3%. It's more than that. We're talking about 100 billion additional, 100 billion on top.
Well, if we got a GDP of 4 trillion, so 1% is 40 billion.
No, we now have 52 billion plus the special fund for our defense fund. If we want to get there, that's how we get to the 2%. So the sums that you're talking about, where's it going to come from?
Well, let me remind you that 3 days after the start of the war, on 27th of February 2022, you promised 100 billion of special assets for the armed forces, and from now on, at least 2% for the armed forces.
We did it.
No, you did not. In the first year, you cut the budget by 300 billion.
80 billion we spent for the German armed forces. What are you talking about? You know, we had 37 billion with the CDU-CSU for our defense budget.
But at that time, there was no war.
No, I increased the budget step by step to this day. I'm sorry, nobody can tell me that's not true. The biggest change in German history.
Let me just remind you of what you pledged on 27th of February 2022, 3 days after the start of the war. And there was this word "and."
Okay, can I remind you what the actual question was, gentlemen? Look, 2% is a big number. And if he doesn't want to tell us, if he says 3%, he's got to tell us how he's going to foot the bill. Is he going to do it without massively cutting social payments? You were saying you're going to be lying to the people. What do you say? Where's the money going to come from, Mr. Merz?
Well, this is going to work if we've got a strong economy. We're too static in our numbers. We're calculating on the basis of the current figures. The decisive point is that we need to grow.
Maybe I can interrupt you just for a moment, just because you just said now that as an export nation, we would be impacted on by higher tariffs. Does that mean that the growth that you're predicting to pay for this isn't going to come as fast as you think? So where's the money going to come from? Just hoping for growth?
Well, there's too many what-if parts of your sentence and your question. It may happen that there is a trade conflict between the Americans and Europe, but it's going to cause damage on both sides, because what Donald Trump hasn't told his voters, tariffs that he is imposing will be paid by consumers.
Who is going to foot the bill for the defense?
We will have to travel in this direction. We will have to go beyond 2%. We have to. And we will also reprioritize items of our budget. And prioritize priorities. We can't just wish for everything. It may well happen that we need to reduce subsidies. We probably need to take a look at public services and look at the number of people working there. Last year, everything grew. The number of public servants grew overproportionally, with the Chancellor office, which is twice as large as it used to be before. There's potential to savings. And let me also
hang on a minute. Let me just ask the
military.
Chancellor, what do you think about that? A smaller Chancellery and the defense? Well, now he's going to say that Ms. Merkel did it. Ms. Merkel planned it. No, I'm not going to say that. The question shows how ridiculous what you're saying here, and what you are saying is ridiculous. There's no economic growth that's going to generate an additional 300 billion euros for the German armed forces in 2028. We're not going to see that kind of scale of growth and taxes. So if you don't reform the debt break with pension, you're going to pay for it through roads, rail, modernization of our economy through pensions and social spending. And saying we can get it there, that's ridiculous. I mean, you're not going to be able to pay this. And I am against you cheating and suggesting that to our citizens that if we're talking about 37 billion euros that we had in 2018 for defense, and then with the NATO criteria, we've got the special military fund, we've got 90 billion. That has a huge consequence for our ability to act. From 2028, the money of the special funding is going to be missing, and that was just debt. And then we're going to have to speak the truth. And that is, there is only one fair proposal in this debate, and that comes from me, from the SPD, and all of the others are silent and come up with ridiculous explanations. We'll have to see, we'll find the money. Well, you will not. You will not find 30 billion to fund our defense spending. One rejoinder, because there was a lie. I mean, saying this is ridiculous.
Well, to call the proposal ridiculous is a kind of language I do not support. You made two proposals, higher debt and tax increases. You made two proposals instead of only one. And that is a pattern that we know from Social Democrats. When somebody is missing, we just incur higher debt. And if that is not enough, we increase taxes.
I said if we want to spend over 2%, then there is no way of doing it. You know, the only ones who, it cannot be that the people who earn over $1 million do not contribute to this. And it's hard enough for us to achieve 2% of GDP for defense spending. No, to say 3% and not say how you're going to pay for it is a problem for our democracy. Now, do we need to reform the debt break? A brief response, Mr. Merz?
Well, I can give a brief answer. I've always been saying that we can discuss about everything. That's not going to be what we start with. We first start with growth, savings potentials, and restructuring of the budget that is necessary.
Okay, that's interesting. So you're opening this door very clearly and saying that there might be a reform of the debt break, even if it won't be the first thing that you do. Now, we've only got another 5 minutes, and I want to ask you whether both of you can imagine to have coalition discussions with one another.
Well, I assume that we are going to win the general elections, and we probably only need one partner, although we will have two possible partners, and we will talk to each other, very probably. But the problem that we've been discussing here is the AfD. We mentioned it. When Mr. Scholz started his office, the AfD was at 10%, and now Mr. Scholz is ending his time as the Chancellor, and they are at 20%. And this is a threat to our democracy. The AfD must become smaller. Mr. Scholz wants to pursue a left policy, and there is no majority in Germany for such a type of policy. Everybody wants to govern with us. We'll have to move towards the political center to make sure that this problem is going to disappear.
Okay, Mr. Merz.
The situation of the economy needs to be improved, and under these conditions, we're going to hold talks.
So you are guaranteeing a change of policy, but you can only do that with the FDP. Is that right? But they might not even make the 5% hurdle?
No, Ms. Illner, I don't share your view. I believe the Social Democrats and the Greens, in this sequence, in this order, will understand after the general election that they cannot continue with their approach. They cannot use the AfD as a tool to block a policy very aggressively, which is being shared and wished for by the majority of the German population. At this point, these two parties will have to move, and if they are well advised, they're going to do so. And if the Social Democrats in the Ruhr Valley are going to lose constituency to the AfD, at latest then will the SPD be willing to hold
Mr.
talks.
Scholz, there's an interesting Deutschland trend that I'd like to refer to here. There's a real concern, 18% say, and 51% say they're very worried. So that 69% people are afraid that after this election there will not be a stable government. Can you take this fear away from them? The citizens of this country will decide on the 23rd of February, and I believe they will decide differently than Mr. Merz has imagined, and that the SPD will get a new mandate. And this is why we will be having coalition discussions with the other partners. Well, you know, the pollsters don't decide what's happening, the people do, and they'll decide on the 23rd of February. And I think they've had some very good reasons this evening of why it's not going to work with the CDU. But one thing is clear. We have been reminded about Mr. Merz's taboo break in terms of cooperation with the AfD. This will also play a role in the election, in the discussions. And I have to say clearly that right-wing populist parties are in Finland, in Sweden, in Norway, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in France, in Portugal, in Spain, in Italy, and in Austria. They are in coalitions in many governments, and that's a problem. And in Germany, against the background of our history, we must do everything we can to ensure that the AfD is not in the coalition, so the Social Democrats will not work with AfD. Now, we have heard in the last 3 years of the coalition, the number of AfD voters has doubled, as Mr. Merz said. We've reached the end of this program, however, and we've got a nice question for you. We wanted to know what sentence you want to use to say goodbye today. I love my wife. That was one option. That was from Gerhard Schröder. And we also had you know me. That was Angela Merkel. So what sentence would you end in this program with?
Well, if you ask this question, I would like to end with saying we've got a plan for this country. We have a lot of confidence in this country. I have the confidence that I can establish a new and a successful government in Germany.
Olaf Scholz, certainly a government that will ensure that Germany remains stable. That will only work if you vote for the SPD. All right, we just wanted to tell you you've had the same amount of airtime, so that's good, it's equal. And we want to thank you for that, and thank you for the discussion. We also want to thank you for this exactly 90 minutes, and to our viewers, thank you for your interest in this election debate. Make sure you go and vote. And now we're going to follow with the news. Have a good evening.
And we pick up there a very exciting and entertaining debate between the two main rivals in this general election that's coming up in 2 weeks' time in Germany. Joining me for analysis of what we've just been watching is Michaela Köfner, also Nina Hase, who's over at the studio where the debate was taking place. Starting with you, Nina, just take us through what stood out to you most.